The bus doors hissed open, releasing a gust of warm air into the crisp Philadelphia morning. Samuel Carter, a retired Army sergeant, stepped forward, his right leg moving with the stiff, mechanical rhythm of a prosthetic. Dressed in a simple button-down shirt and a well-worn pair of jeans, he carried himself with quiet dignity, his posture upright, his face weathered but resolute. The morning rush had already begun, the sidewalks teeming with commuters, their heads bowed against the wind. The city moved as it always had, indifferent to the stories of those who walked its streets. Samuel knew this well. He had spent years blending into crowds, learning to live with the stares, the whispers, and the polite but distant glances people cast at his artificial limb. He gripped the rail and lifted himself onto the bus, feeling the faint vibration beneath his fingers as the vehicle idled. His movements were practiced, steady, the result of years of adapting to a body that no longer moved the way it once did. As he reached into his pocket for the fare, a sharp voice cut through the hum of conversation. Back of the bus. Samuel paused, the coins in his hand clinking together softly. He turned his head toward the voice. The driver, a burly man in his late 50s, with graying stubble and a permanent scowl etched into his weathered face, was staring at him. His name tag read Frank Delaney. His eyes, cold and unyielding, flicked down toward Samuel's prosthetic leg before narrowing with disapproval. "I said, back of the bus," Delaney repeated, his tone harder this time. The bus grew silent. A few passengers shifted in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Others stole quick glances, sensing the tension. The scent of stale coffee and damp fabric lingered in the air. Samuel straightened, his grip tightening around the rail. His military instincts kicked in years of discipline, of standing his ground in the face of confrontation. He met the driver's glare with an unwavering gaze. "I have every right to sit near the front," he said, his voice measured but firm. "I'm a disabled veteran. These seats are for people like me." Delaney let out a derisive snort, shaking his head. "You don't look disabled to me. Take it to the back." Samuel exhaled slowly, willing himself to remain calm. This wasn't the battlefield, but injustice, no matter where it appeared, had a way of igniting something deep within him. "I lost this leg in Afghanistan," he said evenly. "Serving this country. I didn't fight overseas just to come home and be told where I can and can't sit." The murmurs among the passengers grew louder. A woman near the middle row clutched her purse tighter, exchanging a nervous glance with the man beside her. Delaney's jaw clenched. "You holding up my bus, soldier?" Samuel lifted his chin. "No, Frank," he said. "You are." And just like that, the entire bus watched, waiting to see what would happen next. The air inside the bus thickened, the kind of silence that wasn't truly quiet but brimming with unspoken tension. The hum of the engine filled the uneasy pause as Samuel Carter, still standing near the front, squared his shoulders. His grip on the metal rail tightened, his prosthetic leg planted firmly against the rubber mat of the floor. Frank Delaney exhaled sharply through his nose, his irritation deepening. "These seats up front," he said, his voice carrying through the bus, "are for paying passengers who can actually move when needed, not for people looking for special treatment." Samuel blinked slowly, his heartbeat steady but deliberate. He reached into his jacket pocket, producing a small, worn leather case. Flipping it open, he revealed his veteran identification card, the plastic edges smoothed from years of handling. "I served 28 years, he said, his voice even. 3 deployments. Lost my leg in a roadside explosion in Afghanistan. This prosthetic? Courtesy of the U.S. Army. I don't need special treatment, just my right to sit like anyone else." A few murmurs rippled through the bus. A young woman with earbuds glanced up from her phone, her brows furrowing. An older man in a business suit shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. Across the aisle, a mother instinctively pulled her young son closer, sensing the rising hostility. Delaney scoffed, shaking his head with a humorless chuckle. "Oh, I've heard it all before," he sneered, crossing his arms. "You think flashing that little card means something to me? I don't care where you served. I don't care how many medals you got pinned to your chest. You want to sit up here? Take a cab. Or better yet, catch the veterans bus." Isn't that what they got for your kind? Samuel felt the heat rise in his chest. He had faced hostility before he had been ignored, pitted, or treated like a burden. But this? The outright contempt in Delaney's voice struck a nerve deeper than he expected. His fingers curled around his ID before he slipped it back into his pocket. My kind? He repeated, his tone low, measured. Delaney smirked, leaning against the driver's seat as if enjoying himself. Yeah, the ones who think the world owes him something for serving in a war that ended a long time ago. A murmur of discomfort spread through the passengers. A teenager near the middle row exchanged a look with an older woman beside him. A man in a construction vest sighed, shifting his weight like he wanted to say something but hesitated. Samuel inhaled deeply through his nose, forcing his voice to remain steady. I didn't come back from war expecting handouts, he said. I came back expecting respect. But it looks like that's in short supply today. The tension stretched, taut and fragile, as if waiting for something, anything, to snap. Then, from the middle of the bus, someone cleared their throat. And just like that, the tide of the moment began to shift. Samuel Carter exhaled slowly, steadying himself as he eased into the seat near the front, his grip firm around the wooden handle of his cane. His prosthetic leg ached, a dull, familiar pressure that never quite faded. But that wasn't why he stayed put. He stayed because he belonged here. Frank Delaney's fingers twitched around the steering wheel. His knuckles whitened as his patience thinned. Last chance, soldier, he warned, his voice taut with frustration. Get up and move, or I'll move you. Samuel met his gaze, unshaken. I'm sitting right here. Delaney's lip curled. Have it your way. With a sudden jerk, the bus screeched to a halt, lurching forward so violently that passengers were thrown against their seats. A woman near the middle let out a startled gasp as her coffee splashed onto her coat. A teenage boy stumbled, catching himself against a pole. A sharp pain shot through Samuel's knee as the momentum shoved him forward. He gritted his teeth, gripping his cane to brace himself. What the hell was that? A man in a business suit snapped, glaring at the driver. Delaney ignored him, already reaching for the radio mounted near the dashboard. He pressed the button with a deliberate click, his voice cold and official. Dispatch, this is Route 17, he said, his words clipped. I got a non-compliant passenger at the front. He's refusing to move, making a scene, requesting transit security at my location. A hush spread through the bus, thick and uneasy. Samuel clenched his jaw. A scene? He had barely raised his voice. He had done nothing but sit in a seat he had every right to occupy. But he had seen this before. How quickly a narrative could shift when the wrong person told the story. The hairs on the back of his neck bristled. A soft click broke the silence. From 2 rows back, a young woman tilted her phone upward, her screen casting a faint glow against her face. Her hands were steady, her expression unreadable, but her camera was pointed directly at Delaney. And Delaney noticed. His gaze snapped to her, irritation flaring in his eyes. Put that damn thing away, he barked. You don't have permission to record. The young woman didn't flinch. Pretty sure I do, she replied, her voice level. Public transport, public space. A murmur rippled through the bus. The tide was shifting again. A man in a construction vest grunted. She's got a point, he muttered under his breath. Delaney's face darkened. His fingers tightened around the radio, but for the first time, he hesitated. Outside, the whine of sirens drifted through the city air, growing louder with every second. Samuel gripped his cane tighter. It wasn't just a bus ride anymore. Now, the whole world was watching. A charged silence settled over the bus, thick with tension. Outside, the faint wail of sirens crept closer, but inside, something even stronger was building, resistance. From the middle of the bus, a young man in a Temple University hoodie pushed himself up from his seat. He looked barely 20, his backpack slung over one shoulder, but his voice carried more weight than his frame. This is bull, he said, his tone sharp. You're harassing a war hero, a guy who put his life on the line so you could sit here and drive this bus. And you're treating him like he doesn't belong? His words rippled through the passengers, igniting a spark that had been waiting to catch fire. Near the front, an elderly woman, her hands wrinkled, her posture slightly hunched, lifted her cane and pointed it directly at Delaney. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she scolded, her voice clear despite the years etched into it. "Men like him fought so men like you wouldn't have to. My husband came home from Vietnam with half a leg, just like this gentleman here. And do you know how people treated him?" Her voice cracked, but she steadied herself, like he was invisible, like his sacrifice meant nothing. Her words landed heavy in the stale air. Samuel, still gripping his cane, swallowed hard. He hadn't expected this. Not the anger in the student's voice, not the quiet fury in the elderly woman's. He had prepared himself to fight alone. But suddenly, he wasn't alone at all. A businessman in a tailored suit exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, his patience fraying. He looked directly at Samuel. "Stay right there, sir. You have every right to sit wherever the hell you want." A young mother glanced at her son, who was wide-eyed, watching everything unfold. She hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "My brother served in Iraq," she said. "You don't treat soldiers like this. You don't treat people like this." More murmurs rose, more voices joining in. "He's not the problem, you are. You don't get to decide who belongs here. Just drive the damn bus." Frank Delaney's face reddened. His fingers flexed against the steering wheel. His jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. "Enough!" he roared, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "This is MY bus. Not yours. Not his. You all need to mind your own damn business." But it was too late. The entire bus had turned against him. And now, the sirens outside weren't just background noise. They were here. The red and blue lights reflected against the bus windows as the doors hissed open. And in that moment, Delaney realized he had lost. The bus doors hissed open, and the tension inside grew razor-sharp. Two uniformed transit security officers stepped onto the vehicle, their presence shifting the dynamic instantly. The crowd of passengers, once murmuring in frustration, fell into an uneasy silence, their gazes darting between Samuel Carter and Frank Delaney, the fuming driver still gripping the wheel. One officer, a broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed mustache, adjusted his radio as he scanned the scene. His badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the embroidered nameplate on his chest reading, J. Reynolds. The other officer, a younger man with short-cropped hair, glanced around, noting the tension in the air. Delaney wasted no time. He spun in his seat, gesturing wildly at Samuel. "There he is," he barked, his voice still thick with frustration. "That guy. He's refusing to follow instructions. He's causing a scene, holding up my bus. I told him to move, but he won't listen." The passengers reacted with a collective murmur of disbelief. A few scoffs could be heard, and the college student from earlier let out a quiet, incredulous laugh. Officer Reynolds held up a hand, silencing the noise. His expression was neutral but firm. "Sir," he said, his voice steady, "we need to hear from everyone before making a call." Samuel, still seated, remained calm. He'd been in worse situations than this. Far worse. He exhaled slowly, then lifted his cane slightly, shifting his weight so he could address the officers properly. "I'm not causing trouble," he said, his voice even measured. "I boarded the bus, paid my fare, and took a seat. The driver demanded I move to the back." Samuel leaned forward slightly, adjusting his pant leg to reveal the prosthetic limb, the metal gleaming under the bus's dim interior lights. "I'm a disabled veteran," he continued. "This seat is exactly where I'm supposed to be." The second officer, the younger one, stiffened. His brow furrowed, his eyes locked onto Samuel's face. For a beat, he was silent. Then, his features shifted in recognition. "Carter?" Samuel turned fully now, his focus narrowing on the officer's face. It took him a moment, but then, he saw it. The familiarity. "Williams?" Samuel asked, blinking. The younger officer let out a breath, shaking his head in disbelief. "Holy hell," Officer Williams murmured. "Sergeant Carter?" A slow murmur spread through the bus as passengers exchanged glances, sensing something significant unfolding. Samuel gave a nod, his expression softening just slightly. "Been a long time, Williams," he said. Williams let out a breathy chuckle, then straightened, his professional demeanor returning. Delaney's face twisted in confusion. He glanced between them, realization dawning, but he refused to back down. This doesn't change anything." Delaney snapped. "I don't care if you two serve together. He's breaking the rules." Reynolds' jaw tightened. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. "What rules exactly?" he asked. Delaney floundered, his lips moving but no words coming out immediately. The priority seats. They're for people who actually need them." Reynolds' expression darkened. He slowly turned back to Samuel, then to Williams, then back to Delaney. Williams folded his arms. "Sergeant Carter does need it," he said, his tone sharper now. "And federal law protects his right to sit there." Delaney froze. Reynolds pulled out a small notepad, flipping through a laminated reference sheet attached to it. He skimmed it briefly before looking back up at Delaney. "You might want to reconsider your stance, Frank," he said, emphasizing his name with a pointed edge. "The Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits denying access to priority seating for disabled passengers." Delaney bristled. "That's not what I was doing." Williams cut him off. "No? Because it sure looks like you were." The tension inside the bus shifted again. The power dynamic that Delaney had clung to so desperately was slipping fast. The college student smirked, shaking his head. "Now this is getting good." The elderly woman who had defended Samuel earlier huffed, gripping her cane tightly. "It should have never gotten this far," she muttered. Samuel remained silent, letting the officers handle it. Reynolds sighed, his patience wearing thin. "Look, here's the deal. Either you apologize and let this man stay seated where he belongs, or we report you for a violation of federal disability laws. Your call." A long, stretching pause settled over the bus. Delaney's hands clenched into fists, his jaw working furiously. He was out of options, and he knew it. Outside, the crowd, passers-by and pedestrians who had gathered after seeing the commotion, had their phones raised, recording everything. Delaney's breath came out ragged, and finally, his shoulders slumped. But Samuel wasn't done watching. Not yet. Because men like Delaney, they didn't go down without a fight. Frank Delaney stood frozen, his face flushed red, his fingers still clenched into fists at his sides. His breath came in short, ragged bursts, his chest heaving as if he were struggling to keep his temper in check. But there was nothing left to fight for. Officer Reynolds adjusted his belt, his expression impassive. "You're done here, Delaney," he said firmly. "Step off the bus." Delaney's jaw ticked, his eyes darting toward the passengers, his former silent allies, the ones who had sat quietly while he barked orders. But now, they weren't on his side anymore. The college student sat with his arms crossed, an amused smirk playing at his lips. The elderly woman gripped her cane, her glare unwavering. The businessman, the mother, the construction worker. They all stared back at Delaney with one unified expression: disapproval. Even the ones who had hesitated before had chosen a side. And it wasn't his. Williams stepped forward. "Frank Delaney, by order of the Transit Authority, you're suspended, effective immediately, pending an investigation." The words landed like a gavel hitting a courtroom bench. Delaney's face twisted, his hands twitching at his sides. "You can't do this," he seethed. "I was just enforcing the rules." "The only person who broke a rule today was you," Reynolds replied. "Now let's go." For a moment, Delaney didn't move. Then, with a sharp exhale, he yanked his hat off, his grip white-knuckled. Without another word, he stomped toward the front of the bus, his boots thudding against the floor. As soon as his feet hit the pavement outside, a cheer erupted. Passengers clapped, some whistled, others sighed in relief. The college student cupped his hands around his mouth. "Don't let the door hit you on the way out, Frankie." Laughter rippled through the bus, light, victorious. Samuel Carter exhaled, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. He hadn't planned to fight this battle today, but sometimes the battle found you. The young woman with the phone stepped into the aisle, her face alight with excitement. She turned the screen toward Samuel, the video feed still recording. "This is going online tonight," she promised. "People need to see this." Samuel gave her a knowing nod. "Make sure they do." The bus hissed as the doors closed. For the first time since the whole ordeal began, the vehicle felt lighter. A moment later, the replacement driver stepped up. She was a petite woman, maybe in her mid-40s, her uniform neatly pressed. Her dark brown eyes were kind but professional. She adjusted her hat, then turned to Samuel with a respectful nod. "Sergeant Carter," she said warmly, "I just want to say thank you." Samuel studied her for a moment before offering a small, tired smile. "No thanks necessary," he said. "I just did what was right." She nodded again. "Still," she said, "no one should have to go through that. I'm sorry for what happened today." Samuel nodded in understanding. The driver took her seat, adjusting the mirrors, settling in like a professional ready to do the job right. A second later, the bus lurched forward, rolling down the streets of Philadelphia once again. The tension that had gripped the passengers slowly eased. Conversations resumed. Small talk filled the air, but the energy was different now. Lighter, freer. Then, a ping echoed through the bus. A passenger's phone lit up, the screen flashing with a breaking news alert. The headline read, "Bus driver harasses disabled veteran. Passengers fight back." Video goes viral. The man holding the phone let out a low whistle. "Damn," he murmured. "That was fast." The young woman with the video grinned. "Oh, it's just getting started." Samuel Carter glanced out the window, watching the city blur past. The battle was over, but the story was only beginning. By the time Samuel Carter stepped off the bus that evening, his face and his story had already begun to circulate across the country. What began as a single recording from a young woman on a Philadelphia city bus quickly became a national topic of conversation. Veterans organizations, advocacy groups, and ordinary citizens rallied behind him, flooding the transit agency's phone lines and inboxes with complaints. By morning, the Philadelphia Transit Authority had no choice but to respond. At a hastily arranged press conference, a stern-faced spokesman stood before a wall of cameras, reading a prepared statement. "We deeply regret the unacceptable treatment of Sergeant Samuel Carter," the spokesman said. "Effective immediately, we are implementing mandatory disability awareness and sensitivity training for all employees. Veterans and passengers with disabilities deserve our utmost respect, and today, we reaffirm our commitment to ensuring that happens." The words were carefully chosen, but the real victory came later that afternoon. Frank Delaney was fired. A single press release from the Transit Authority confirmed it. "After a thorough review, Mr. Delaney is no longer employed by our organization." No further details. No sympathy for him. Just a clear farewell. And that wasn't all. A few days later, Samuel received an unexpected phone call from a representative of the Philadelphia City Council. The invitation was simple. "We'd like you to speak at next week's council meeting about veterans' rights and public access. Your story has made a real impact, Sergeant Carter. People are listening." Samuel sat with the phone pressed to his ear for a moment, letting the words sink in. Everyone was listening. For years, he had fought overseas, battles that tested his strength, his endurance, his will to survive. But this battle, a battle for respect, for dignity, for the simple right to sit without being told he didn't belong, turned out to be just as important. And now? Now, he had a platform. On the day of the council meeting, Samuel stood before a packed chamber. News crews, veterans, and city officials all watched as he stepped to the microphone. He wasn't nervous. He had stood before people before, his voice echoing across battlefields. So he spoke the truth. He spoke about the silent struggles veterans face every day. Invisible battles, battles that don't end when they come home. He spoke about dignity, accessibility, and the simple, unshakable truth that respect is not a privilege. It's a right. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Then, as he walked through the hallways of City Hall, hands reached out to shake his. People stopped to thank him, not just for his service, but for his courage. A flood of emails and messages from fellow veterans poured in. Some shared their own experiences, thanking him for standing. Others simply wrote, "Because of you, I won't be silent next time." As Samuel sat on his porch that evening, Watching the Philadelphia skyline glow in the distance, his phone buzzed with another notification. The video, his story, was still going viral. A reminder, standing up for what's right always makes a difference. And this time, the world listened.